So which were the 40k miniatures in 2025 that people loved the most, and which ones were considered Games Workshop's worst creations? Let's talk through a top 10 of the highs and lows. Hello and welcome back to Best Tactics, where today we're talking about some of the best and worst looking miniatures in Warhammer 40k, doing a bit of a recap of the year's releases, which ones impressed people the most, and which ones Games Workshop maybe missed the mark on, or just felt a bit boring. 2025 was really quite a big year for Warhammer 40k releases. We got no less than 5 quite major faction release waves, then a bunch of stuff for Space Marines towards the end of the year, plus things for kill teams and characters and spot codex releases in between. For a top 10 of the highs and lows, I asked you guys to rate each of the year's miniatures by their looks, and we'll go through them by that metric, starting with the top 10 of miniatures you guys found least interesting, going through a few of the highs and lows of the individual release waves, and then finishing up with a top 10 of people's favourite miniatures. Starting with the miniatures that maybe didn't really capture the imagination quite so much, I feel like the vast majority of slightly poorly received miniatures maybe weren't so bad that they were standout haters, but more got a slightly muted reception, not really being quite as interesting for various different reasons, whether or not it was just having something that was fairly similar to what came before, or maybe Games Workshop not realising the design and making it quite as standout as people might have hoped for. Just out of the top 10, there's a fair few ones that people weren't quite so bothered about: the Capricus Carrier and Defender for the Leagues of Votan, the Admech Servitor Battleclade, neither of which I'd say they hugely got wrong in any major way, but I can see why people might rate those as not the single most inspiring miniatures of their ranges. There were a couple of the Ultramarines down here, Marnius Calgar and Cato Sicarius. I can't help but think that that's maybe a little bit of community fatigue with Ultramarine releases coming out, particularly for Calgar, who's already had a model update in the Primaris age. And for a few others, there were things like the Bloodclaws and Grey Hunters, who maybe weren't enormously different from standard Primaris Marines. I feel like people are often just a little bit less over-enthusiastic about the base troops of the army being redone, and the World Eaters Goremongers, I feel like there's generally better reception for the actual Space Marines. There were a couple of units that would have nosed into the top 10 as well that I didn't include for this one. I guess the Tyranid Prime with Lash Whip hasn't been received as a particularly exciting miniature, just given it's basically a slightly different warrior sculpt with a different weapon option. I wouldn't say anything hugely wrong with the model though as Tyranids go. And I did ask people about the Saturnine box set contents as well. The Arachnid Quad Autocannon platform scored a 2.9 stars out of 5, a slightly unusual inclusion in the Saturnine box set, feeling like a bit more of a fortification battlefield terrain thing versus a more standard unit. Into the top 10 that were voted the lowest though, and first up we have the World Eater's Slaughterbound, an 8-bound with a Bloodthirster possessing it. A fairly fun idea, and in reality he wasn't really too badly received. He scored him a 3.1 stars out of 5. I feel like miniatures in this sort of region are more sort of seen as okay and not really super standout, as opposed to really hated. I think the main criticism of this guy was that he's not really also very different from something that you could have kit bashed anyway from 8-bound, adding in a few more skulls and doing an arm swap. I certainly suspect that the context of him releasing didn't really help out too much either. People were hoping for a wider World Eaters release with plenty more units added to the range, but that wound up not materialising. He has often been taken to the table in competitive lists though, a pretty scary frontline melee threat with a whole bunch of attacks, or very hard hitting with 8-bound of either flavour, and he really enjoys the Berserker Glaive to amp up his damage. Next up, and also on the muted reception side of things, we have the Sanctifiers. They're the Ministorum Warband kill team for the Adept Sororitas or the Imperial Agents. They definitely have the feels of a whole bunch of background Ministorum characters that you might have seen in past artwork for Warhammer 40k. And in game they're a fairly solidly effective flamer unit, able to scout up the board, and they get really quite a lot of Ministorum hand flamers to douse the enemy in Prometheum. I feel like if people were evaluating them from a sister's point of view, people just tend to have a much better and warm reception for the actual power-armoured nuns with guns as opposed to the Ecclesiarchy hangers-on. And it maybe does feel like a few of the sculpts on these ones have some slightly unusual faces and things, even if I do like quite a few of the ideas that they've got going in the squad. Again, this slightly middling reception area, we've got Captain Centos. He was the store celebration model for Games Workshop's shop opening milestones. They often tend to bring him out with certain iterations of 100 stores, hence his Centos name. He's also been credited as the third company captain of the Ultramarines as well. I don't think he had any specific datasheet rules, you just use him as a standard Space Marine Primaris captain, which already works well for the datasheet. Punchy enough with some Stern Guard and a Power Fist maybe, and can do pretty well in Blood Angels. I can maybe see why this one didn't have huge amounts of excitement. Plenty of people have a lot of fatigue from Space Marine releases, full stop. And he is at least a fairly straightforward captain model. He does have a bit of retro vibes with that back banner, and they certainly seem to have been going for that with the rest of his paint job as well. With back banner, armament, pose and colour scheme, he does have a fair few things that sort of make him not so very different from Pedro Cantor. I think that people would have been a lot more enthused if they'd done a resculpt of him. I'm maybe not too surprised to see people not getting massively excited about another Space Marine captain option though. Next up, we've got the Imperial Knight Defender. This one's the upgrade sprue that they added into the Questoris Knight kit, and now it's an option versus the Canis Rex kit that you can pick up. He gets some techie weapons with a shield generator mounted on his carapace, and some fairly fun firepower with a great big plasma cannon and a conversion beamer. It's fairly effective on the tabletop at the moment. It's a bit of effort to bring him down as he always gets a 4+ invulnerable save, and it's got quite a good bondsman ability, boosting armigers with a -1 damage. The main reason that he was slightly worse received than others is that he just doesn't really do anything so very different to the previous Questoris Knights that we had, and just feels like a fairly straightforward wargear swap for that. There's nothing enormously wrong with it, but just given that most of the model wasn't new, it wasn't so amazingly well received. It's interesting that that wasn't such a problem for people with the Knight Ruinator though. Maybe his armament is a bit more unique with that Felbor. Before we move on to the worst rated models of the year, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor WarMag. They're an effective and affordable UK based seller of magnetic components and storage boxes, based in the UK and shipping to most locations around the world, though not the USA at the moment. That'll come later apparently. Their main offering is some very cheap and effective magnetic storage, basically having versions of their take on the sort of really useful box storage hack. The idea being that you have a sturdy lightweight plastic box, put some sticky metal sheets on the surfaces, and then you have a really cheap and stackable solution that can get you miniatures from A to B in safety. They've got a fairly massive amount of different products and configurations of this. One popular one is this double decker one, where you basically have 2 layers worth of figures in one really useful box. Beyond their big box combos, they've got a big range of different designs for their rubber metal sheets. Could be fun if you want a custom design to fit with your army. They have these for super cheap as well if you just want to use them in other boxes. As well as that, they've got some magnets for under bases as well. Sticky magnets that fit fairly well under Citadel bases and can be cut to size if needed if there's some tabs or anything in the way. In any case though, check them out, links down in the video description, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. With the slightly dubious honour of 6th least well received Warhammer 40K miniature this year, we've got the Red Gobbo in his Tim Boy. He still has fun factor, and overall you guys gave him a 3 out of 5. The Red Gobbo of course being Games Workshop's rather quirky Christmas mascot with a slightly communist Gretchen Santa. Maybe doing a little bit of work to try and make them different to the previous ones. This one he's built himself in Nutcracker style mech suits, trying to go with some Vostroyan vibes. He's not aimed at mainstream Warhammer 40k, though he does have sort of weirdly good lone operative legends rules with his datasheets, a fairly chunky profile and some free grenades thrown in. I feel like for these ones, Games Workshop's sort of quirky festive miniatures just aren't really everyone's cup of tea really. Some quite like them for a little painting project and a bit of fun, but lots of people just don't really have a huge amount of interest and just leave it to the people who enjoy it. For this one specifically, it does feel like maybe just a slightly odd miniature to kind of read really. It's sort of leaning out the front of the chest of the Tim Boy guy, making the whole setup just a little bit unusual, almost looking like he's got 2 heads here. In 5th place on this list, and voted just a little bit lower with 2.9 stars out of 5, we've got the Sekitar robots. These were released for the Thousand Suns for 10th edition, and they're basically psychically active automata for the Thousand Suns, done in the style of Egyptian guardian statues. They might leave these to stand sentinel over sites of their power and control, even when the Legion has departed, and intruders might get an unwelcome surprise when they come to life and start purging them with warp flame. In game they were a bit on the niche side previously. With a small points cut though, they're seeing quite a lot more competitive play. They've got the role for some slightly punchy infiltrators for the army, and having free overwatch is quite nice to cause some casualties as the opponent moves up. For the miniatures, it just felt like they were trying to communicate quite a lot with just one model here. The fact they're trying to get them to resemble Egyptian statues, I think determined the pose of them, and certainly for me, the first time I saw them, I was maybe a little bit surprised at just how static they were looking. They weren't really what I was expecting in terms of those Thousand Suns automata that had been teased a fair bit. I was maybe expecting something a bit more like the Castellax Achaea from the Horus Heresy. I guess their bone colour scheme probably didn't really help them as well. It just makes them feel a bit other and stand apart from the army. Whereas if you'd had them a bit more fully in Thousand Suns colours, they might have felt like they were fitting in just a little bit closer alongside maybe. Having said all that, they weren't terribly received by everyone, and some people really liked them. For 4th lowest voted here, we've got Ferran Araios. He's the star of some Dawn of Fire novels, the captain of the Ultramarine 6th Company, and the Master of Rites. And he had a new miniature released to go along with all the other Ultramarine ones that we've had kind of recently, alongside a Black Library novel released for him. I'd guess he might well have a Legends datasheet turn up for him at some point, just because he can't arm standard Space Marine captains with a Thunderhammer. I guess maybe it might even drop with the Balanced Data Slate update. If so, then we'll find out fairly shortly. Otherwise, just proxying as a captain with a Power Fist isn't the worst thing in the world. As miniatures go, along with Captain Centos, is just a fairly straightforward Space Marine captain, this time with some Ultramarine heraldry going on as well. I do quite like his servo scribe thing. His pose is alright maybe. I did see a few people who weren't entirely convinced by the great big 6th Company badge that he seems to be showing off there. It does feel like a slightly ludicrously oversized medal or pen badge or something. Again, I suspect that being an Ultramarine releasing at the time of lots of other Ultramarine releases, probably getting a few people doing process votes and voting down Ultramarines here as well. Next up and voted third from bottom is the First of the Faithful, the Genestealer Cult unique Primus model that you can get at Warhammer events, basically a slightly different sculpt compared with the standard Primus one, going for a different pose and some slightly different styling on his weapons and things. Otherwise he is looking rather similar to the regular Primus for the Genestealer Cults. The Primus has maybe dropped in use a fair bit after they gave them those rules nerfs in the last balance update. No longer re-rolling all hit rolls was definitely a blow to the standard Genestealer Battle Commander. Once again, it's not like he's hugely voted lower than the vast majority of other things out here, just maybe not huge amounts of excitement. I feel like just being a bit of a repose of the other miniature without feeling too very different doesn't help, and Genestealer Cult do maybe feel like one of the factions where there's some divide between the people who like their aesthetic and other people who really aren't a fan. Sort of uncanny valley half Xenos men with big craniums is maybe a bit more of an acquired taste than some. There weren't too many people giving him a 1 out of 5, but just quite a lot of people just low-key not really finding much to like about him, rating him a 2 out of 5 here. Overall factual miniature releases for 40k though, there were just the two that were kind of notably lower than the rest. First up is the resculpt of the Space Marine drop pod. This one was rated at 2.4 out of 5 for you guys, so pretty significantly below anything else we've seen so far on the list. Drop pods being the way that Space Marines deploy for a fight from orbit, screaming through the atmosphere and making impact onto the ground, and then disgorging a squad out to fight for the enemy and secure a drop zone. Despite a rules refresh when these came out, they unfortunately remain rather niche for the Space Marines. They can be a pricey option for some first turn deep strike delivery for ranged weapons, but it's quite a few points to gain access to, and it just doesn't really seem to be too necessary for most Space Marine lists. Their miniature resculpt was one that caused a bit more of a stir than most though. They've been redone as more of a terrain set piece as opposed to the miniature that you could open and close the doors of before. I think that one rubbed a lot of the people up the wrong way. They made a few other changes as well, adding the option of some sort of rock bits that you could have around the outstretched doors, and they took the gun away from it, which wasn't exactly something that was more fun. I kind of suspect though that even if they hadn't had a little bit of unpopularity going with these, they probably would have been rated mid at best. Kind of inanimate battlefield machinery just doesn't really tend to get people so excited for the quality of the miniature compared with individual character sculpts and squads and things. Even the drop pod was really quite heavily beaten out by the first place though, and maybe not to too many people's surprise, that'll be the Grandmaster in Nemesis Dread Knight upgrade sprue. This was given a 1.9 out of 5 by you guys, so really quite a lot of people rating it very low indeed. Basically an upgrade sprue added into the existing Dread Knight box set, aiming to be a better representation of the Grandmaster Dread Knight datasheet that we've been able to field for a while now. The overall Commander-in-Chief of a Grey Knight Brotherhood, fighting in their super suit that they use to try and go toe-to-toe with greater demons. They're currently really quite effective for the Grey Knights in-game at the moment. That Subliminator gets some play with the big melter weapon, and with their big rerolls that they can get in close combat, they're pretty much the top anti-vehicle and monster choice for them. This one, even more than some of the rest, just touched a nerve though. People aren't particularly over-enthused by just upgrade sprues being added into an existing kit anyway, as we saw with the Knight Defender. And it doesn't really help when the base model isn't a particularly well-liked one in the Dread Knight. The sort of Terminator baby carrier isn't really regarded as one of Games Workshop's finest creations they've ever done, and I feel like people wouldn't have been averse to them having another go with it, and this one just sort of feels like doubling down on the same kit. Add that to the disappointment of Grey Knights players hoping for a range refresh, or at least one other miniature they think will guaranteed be safe for a range refresh, and I guess you set the stage for a lot of disappointed Grey Knight players. Those were the ones that were voted lowest, though before we take a look at the top 10, let's just take a look at a few of the things in the middle. The Leagues of Votan release, as often seems to be the case with them, doesn't have so many things that are voted right towards the very lowest, but also doesn't really have any things that break into the top 10. It seems that out of their release wave this year, the one that was voted lowest was the Capricus Transport, the Hernkin and sort of circular grav engine sort of thing is liked by some more than others, I guess. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the one that was voted highest was Bury Agneson. He was pretty fun with all of his Space Dwarf finery, great big Darkstar glaive, and Tyrannid trophies he's taken from his kills. It is kind of impressive that out of the other 4 major release waves that we had, none of them had any miniatures that were featured in the bottom 10 either, though literally all the rest have multiple things in the top 10. The ones that were regarded as a bit mid for the Space Wolves were the Grey Hunters and Bloodclaws. You guys gave them a 3.2 stars out of 5. I don't feel like they were awful, but I'm not too surprised they just didn't have quite as much excitement. Several of them at least somewhat standard Primaris with a few Space Wolf flavourings thrown on. That's kind of what there should be at the base troops really, but that's why the more elite units tend to have a bit more excitement. I think the same is true for the Emperor's Children with their Tormentors and Infractors. Nothing hugely wrong with them, but there's just a bit more fun factor and excitement around just about any of the rest. They were rated a bit more middling at 3.4. Emperor's Children, Deathcore and Eldari though were pretty well received throughout the entirety of their range, even the very worst stuff rated at least somewhat positively. It looks like we had the Deathcore heavy weapons gain the least excitement for the Krieg stuff, and then the Eldari Fire Dragons for the Aspect Warriors, both of which are still regarded as really quite nice looking kits though, like the Deathcore Fire Coordinator. I can maybe see the Fire Dragons being just a little bit less exciting and centerpiece for their standard rank and file, though I think the X art looks really nice. For any of these rating miniatures sort of contests as well, it does tend to be the centerpiece characters that often get a lot of the attention as individual sculpts that capture the eye. As a result, only one squad made its way into the top 10. These were the 2nd through 4th places, the Noise Marines placing just out of the top 10, and then the Space Wolves Head Takers and the Wolfguard Terminators going 3rd and 4th. All of them regarded very highly indeed though, getting a 4 stars out of 5 overall. The Victrix Guard Warp Spiders and Raveners weren't so far behind either. For other honourable mentions in the top 10, there's also Sabodan Khan, Ayak Rockfist and Lady Malice as well, and lots of things not so very far behind that, ranked around 3.8 or 3.7 or so. Finally, for honourable mentions before the top 10, there were 2 units that would have placed in there in the Saturnine Dreadnought and Necrosaur Amantar. I didn't include the Horus Heresy ones, as they're not really 40k releases, but it seems that people really enjoyed the Saturnine Dreadnought's look, to the point where they rated it higher than a whole bunch of other cool stuff we've just seen. Necrosaur Amantar of the Necrons hasn't released yet, so I didn't include him either, but again looks like he's been really well received as a creepy destroyer lord with the asymmetry and all ready to try and scour the galaxy of life in the 500 worlds apparently. Lucius the Eternal was just out of the top 10, placing 11th, also on 4 stars. He was a miniature that had really quite a lot of hype to get an updated sculpt, one of the ones languishing with a really old miniature dating from the early 2000s, with his slightly zany lore that if you kill him and take any pride in the kill, Slanesh will slowly and painfully transform you into a new copy of him, all ready to fight and win and lose anew, your face just being a face on his armour of shrieking souls. He's a pretty cool little centerpiece for the army, gesturing out with his blade. I quite like the dynamic look of the Lash of Torment here, and it's got a suitably depraved and cracked face, and doesn't seem to be going light on those combat stims either. Into the top 10 proper, and in 10th place we have the Krieg Command Squad. They lead their vat-grown and all rather fearless and dutiful charges into battle. They chose to go with a Lord Commissar to lead the Kriegsmen, who are often employed to give them a bit more self-preservation, as much to maintain order here. It's quite a nice little diorama of a squad. You've got an aspirant commissar, a few veterans and box operators and an alchemist. The standard bearer is a fun little miniature as well, and their pet servo scribes are nice. A few of them also having some fun base details with the Krieg barbed wire thing going on. They're nice enough for order support in game, though maybe aren't seen quite as widely as the Cadians joining the shock troops, giving you some sticky objectives on your command bunker back in the home field. It was also Krieg in 9th place with the artillery team. This one's a big gun guard artillery carriage, and it's basically the spiritual successor to a good number of Forge World artillery pieces that the Deathcore and Guard had access to previously. Not directly translating the Earthshaker or Medusa platforms, but not so far away in the siege gun, and having a nice quad launcher as well. In game, they're one of the better direct damage dealers that Guard have to offer, with some damage 3 shots at high strength. They haven't been super common to see in competitive lists recently, unless that new Guard detachment brings them back in vogue a bit with a reroll 1s to hit and wound. This was my favourite release out of the recent Krieg range as well. Again, a rather cool little diorama with 3 Kriegsmen manning the really big gun. I quite like the sandbags they've built up there. I feel like it has a bit of appeal as a generic unit that you could swap into multiple Guard armies. Just really quite a solidly executed concept all around, and has a good early 20th century warfare sort of vibe that the Guard are well known for. Next up, we've got an Eldari offering with Fugan the Burning Lance. He's the chief of the Fire Dragon aspect, leading them into battle and epitomising Kane as the Destroyer, utterly eradicating enemy monsters and vehicles with unbridled destruction. He's certainly been hitting the table a whole load for the Eldari recently, often with 10 Fire Dragons in tow and then jumping in and out of a Wave Serpent to make a devastating unit that you can't hit back very easily. His own gun hits really hard and he increases the range of his squad as well. His updated sculpt was really quite a long time coming, a lot of the Eldari aspects and Phoenix Lords coming from before the year 2000, and it feels like he's got a nice balance between some scary looking weapons and a bit of ornate finery to denote his status. The addition of the back banner was quite a fun one with the dragon logo there, and the burning Chaos Marine head on his base is quite a nice touch as well. In 7th place we have the Wolf Priest. This guy basically being the fusion of the Space Wars Chaplain and Apothecary roles, instilling the battle rage in his brothers, and also patching them up or doing the grim duties of the Apothecary when they should become too injured. On the tabletop, that's exactly what he does as well, giving you a +1 to wound in melee, and also threatening to revive models. That can be quite a big deal on valuable ones like the 3 wound Wolfguard Head Takers. For a support character, his was really quite a well done one. A menacing pose of a spooky power armoured warrior with a wolf skull and hood, striding ominously into battle with those big furred robes. They managed to give him really quite a nice feel here, Lots of effort put into this one, and nice to have a couple of head swaps as well, either fitting in nicely with the veterans or maybe the blood claws as you should see fit. In 6th place, we have the highest voted Krieg model with Lord Marshal Dreyer. He was a new character introduced with the launch of the recent Krieg range, a frontline Krieg commander, and he somewhat epitomises their cult of sacrifice, always being ready to lay down his life for the Emperor, and in doing so he's not at all afraid to fight in the direst of circumstances on the front line. Though despite often leading Death Rider charges into impossible odds, he always seems to manage to survive somehow, and often requests his injured steed be patched back up again if it takes damage. Lots of people got their hands on this model from the Deathcore Krieg launch box, though unfortunately he's been rather underwhelming for his points cost in game ever since. He adds devastating wounds to the Death Rider squads, and he has the chance to revive on death, though he's just all around very costly for what he does right now. His miniatures are pretty cool and ominous one though, both a gas mask, steed and rider. A little bit of finery with that head plume and a few aquillas, but maybe not really so much that he's not looking rather practical. You've got the choice to either arm him with his pistol or his sabre drawn, and again he's got these sort of barbed wire trench style World War I bases that a lot of the other Krieg have. The rather twisted clawed feet of his Krieg steed standing astride that. It is kind of impressive at just how well he went across compared with the Lord Solar sculpt. You certainly don't get quite so many people wanting to replace this guy with conversions or stand-ins. Placing in 5th, and we have the Demon Primarch Fulgrim himself, everyone's favourite depraved Demon Primarch of excess, leader of the Emperor's children, and joining battles when it suits and interests him. On the tabletop, maybe at least a little bit pricey for what he does currently, unless they choose to change that in the upcoming balance pass. He moves fast and can fight first, though just struggles for his overall damage and defence for his 340 point cost at time of recording. It's not really any huge surprise to see Fulgrim ranked up here. Big impressive Demon Primarch models always get some interest. Games Workshop makes a special effort for them, and they're always guaranteed to get a fair bit of interest just due to how well their characters have been developed in lore and backstory. This new miniature has him as his great winged snake form, serpentine body all coiled up, a rather depraved and manic looking face with a few different swap options, a disturbing peeled back skin around a Slaanesh icon, and a few different weapons including a blade that resembles the reforged fire blade that was given by Ferrus Manus. Overall, he's been pretty solidly well received to stand alongside the other pantheon of the Demon Primarchs. I was the highest voted Emperor's Children model. In 4th place overall, voted at 4.3 out of 5, we've got Infinity's Lament. It seems that people were really quite impressed by the Warhammer Plus miniature of this year. A pretty cool and effective little diorama of an Eldari Spirits here, retrieving the Fallen Spirit Stone out of a destroyed Wraith Lord, maybe to reunite it back with the Infinity Circuits. This one's meant more to be a display piece than a gaming piece. The Spirit Seers can help out the Wraith units, though they are a bit niche for the Eldari right now. But overall the miniature I think is very nicely done. I think it's a good move for them to go back to the diorama style miniatures for Warhammer Plus. They generally just add a bit more excitement versus the single figure miniatures. I must admit this one's got a particularly nicely executed paint job as well. Those blues and yellows absolutely glow. It wasn't quite the highest ranked Eldari miniature though, as that honour falls to Lycus, the Whispering Web, and the newly created Phoenix Lord of the Warp Spiders. The Eldari aspects that perilously jump between the Immaterium and real space, using their warp jump generators to appear unbidden and slaughter the enemy with monofilament weapons, though at great personal risk to themselves. In-game, Lycus has been an absolute powerhouse since her release, being able to teleport along with the warp spiders and then both shoot fairly powerfully and go on to charge and hit hard in close combat after that. The miniature and what they went for was really quite a fun one too, basically bursting into real space in a sort of spider's web like halo of lightning, the appearance of being held aloft with all blades ready to strike, and having the full 8 limbs of a spider here, a sword and irregular ones, plus some extra ones for 2 different flavours of monofilament weapons beyond that, all very appropriate for the Eldari, and it was really quite fun to see them develop a Phoenix Lord for the Warp Spiders. In 2nd place, we have the brooding dour figure of Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf and Chapter Master of the Space Wolves, having had a long and storied history since Warhammer 40K's early days, leading his chapter into battle against all manner of foes, and even against overzealous Inquisition as well. He's powerful in game for the Space Wolves, though in a kind of unusual way. Good melee damage, of course, though his other rules are interesting, allowing you to bring Terminators in first and then debuff enemy command points and cause disruption nearby. Between all that's being very solid for his points cost though, and he can lead the Terminators for a really general purpose threatening units. The new incarnation of his model took him off his sort of hoversleigh style thing that he had from his previous miniature, and instead has him in the new upscaled Terminator armour, a great wolf pelt over his back, plenty of finery beyond that, a nice new rendition of the rather disturbing looking axe of Morkai, and perched over on a rocky outcrop alongside 2 great hunting wolves. Again, I feel like the paint job really does him a good service here. The sort of dark, shadowy, brooding look that he's got going on as he stares down at the luckless foe that he pronounces judgment on, I think really takes him to the next level here. Just the one miniature beat out Logan Grimnar though, and that honour seems to have fallen to another Space Marine, this one of the Raven Guard, and you guys seem to have rated Ethon Shan as your single favourite miniature for 2025, giving him a super big 4.5 stars out of 5. This guy's the new chapter master of the Raven Guard, basically stepping in for Shrike when he relinquished the position, and he's going back to the Shadow Captain role. He tends to observe battles from afar, coordinating his forces via the Vox, and then at a pivotal moment in the battle choosing to commit when a single killing blow can make all the difference, putting his mighty close combat prowess to the test alongside his chapter. At least prior to any balanced data slate updates, he's one of the single strongest datasheets in the entire game, at least for now. Very, very fast, incredibly fighty for a lone operative as well, and then in the Shadow Mark Talon allows you to return to reserves with units for free, and that's a stratagem that you can easily get loads of value with all game long. His miniature was pretty well loved by most people as soon as they revealed it. Again, a pretty nicely balanced Space Marine miniature, generally somewhat practical looking armour, and is perched on a great big withered tree style thing. A few head swaps depending on which one you'd like, a cloak of shadowy feathers, all very appropriate for the Raven Guard. I think those tassels are rather fun as well, with some spooky looking hovering bird skull constructs down below, and some fairly vicious looking 3 talons lightning claws. Really nice to see the Raven Guard get something cool. Finally, and just for one last honourable mention, I will just say that if we'd included the Catan Shard of the Nightbringer on this one, as a miniature that's been announced but hasn't quite been released yet, this guy would have actually topped the charts, being just very slightly ahead of Ethon Shan. At this point though, he's going to be a miniature for 2026, not 2025. It was very well done though, the reincarnation of the Catan God of Death, flanked by some swirling scarabs, scythe held aloft, and his Necron cape disintegrating into pixels and lightning beneath him, is a pretty awesome centerpiece model for a big deal threat in 40k. In any case though, let me know your takes as to the miniatures of Warhammer 40k. Which of the miniature releases did you like or dislike the most out of Games Workshop's 2025 ones? And were you surprised by what was liked the most or least? I look forward to hearing any insights down in the comments as always. As mentioned, a big thank you to WarMag for sponsoring this one. Check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look at their magnetic goodies to create some very cheap and effective magnetic storage and individual magnets to go under model bases. There'll be links down in the video description. That's about it for this one though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel and keep these coming, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.